5th anniversary, and wouldn't it be wonderful to go back to some of the earlier members to find out how we did, and then perhaps have them project into the future how we should do it in the next 25 years. So I'd like to introduce the members, and I'm also going to give you their member number. Now, there's a slight misprint in the program because it does say founding members, and they're not all founding members, and you'll know who's not with the member number. But we have Manny Stile, number 1, Alice Ridge, number 3, Andrew Wolvid, number 9, Carol Brown, number 59, Warren Gore, number 83, and Sheila Bentley, number 633. But here's what's absolutely incredible. She came in the 3rd year. So within 3 years, they had over 600 members. So I think that definitely speaks to the growth of the organization in the late 70s, early 80s, which I think is really impressive. So what we're going to do is chronologically, how did we do? Have everybody give us a 2 to 3 minute interpretation, their interpretation of how they think we did based on the goals in front of you, plus the artifacts that they have. And then in reverse order, we'll attack the what should we do in the next 25 years. And then we'll open it up to discussion. So, Manny, how did we do?
We did great. We did great, but there is so much more to do. And we'll get to the latter part. As I went through the remembrance moments of this organization, it's always interesting to be there in the beginning, as many people were. I got to thinking that this organization really started back in the 1940s, but nobody knew it, with the work that Ralph Nichols did. And by the way, Dr. Nichols and Colonel would extend their greetings to all today. I met Ralph Nichols in 1962, and I would say that the formation of this organization, in a sense, began then, but it really began in 1979 when I held the first annual, we're still thinking about having the second annual one, by the way, but the first annual State of the Art of Listening Symposium at the University of Minnesota, and invited a number of people, 27 of whom accepted the invitation and trekked their way to the University of Minnesota. And there are great stories that you should ask some of those old people in terms of older people. Those early, well, I'm including myself, the early attendees. In fact, I could show you some pictures if Alice wants to take exception with that statement. If you want to see some young people, we've got early pictures. But you should ask some of the early attendees some of their stories about how they found, how they got through the Minnesota State Fair and how they did some of those things. But at that symposium, amongst other things, we basically explored the state of the art of listening. And we'll come back at another time and talk about this, as many other people will talk about this, but at that time the position was simply that we were a stepchild, we're a third cousin, et cetera, in the field of communication. People talked about it, but nobody was doing much with it collectively. And as a result of that gathering of 27 people, it was proposed that we create and found the International Listening Association. The good news is back in 1979, at that first State of the Art of Listening Symposium, which then led to the 1980, 6 months later, the convening of double or more people in Atlanta, where we created the Constitution, we created the purpose, the mission, selection of officers, all of those things. But at the 1979 meeting, there was a creation of 14 pressing needs, if you will, that were identified and recorded at least by the attendees at that meeting. I'm not going to read those, but the fact of the matter is, when you ask how did we do, it will be very interesting for any historian or anyone who is interested to take the original 14 pressing needs they were identified as, and compare where are we at today. What have we accomplished? What have we not accomplished? What demands continued focus and so forth. But what I would like to say in just my short moment here is that the essence of the creation of this organization was all built around a simple concept, and that is, how do you pull together a very diverse group of individuals, educators, business people, governmental people, military people, church people, researchers, a whole variety of people to focus on how do we promote and advance listening in this field. And that ought to be the ultimate measurement, I think, the yardstick that we should come back to and talk about later.
Terrific, thank you.
Are you done?
3 minutes.
I cut him off.
Go?
I cut him
Okay,
off.
all right. Being on this panel forced me to dig into my file cabinet, the back one, in the basement, the bottom drawer. And I found some things I didn't know I had. I had apparently written to Ralph Nichols the summer of 1979, and I have a 3-page longhand response. Apparently, I asked him, where are the materials? I had been teaching listening for 3 years, and I didn't have squat. And I said, where will I find materials? And he says, come to Minnesota and learn from Manny Stiles. So I did. I sat in on a class of his. So there's Ralph in my file cabinet. Then, next thing I found was the agenda for the 1979 meeting. We actually had an agenda, so you were organized. The 1979 meeting. I was the only person at that meeting of the 20, I had 25 listed, you had 27.
So, 27.
I was apparently the only one with a pencil and paper because I was immediately, well, I was, doodling, taking notes, and all of a sudden I was secretary pro temp. We hadn't met yet in Atlanta, so I was secretary pro temp. And it's kind of interesting. There's something in the minutes, the very first minutes. It refers to what you just said. We apparently discussed in 1979 the relationship of this brand new organization to be with SCA, Speech Communication of America. And apparently we decided we were going to stand alone. We would be affiliated with, but we were not going to be an interest group. We were not going to be subsumed. Well, a few months after the Atlanta meeting, I ran into Ron Allen, who was president of SCA then, and he had heard of us, and he said, hey, when are you guys going to apply to be an interest group? And I said, probably never. And he said, oh, but you can't stand alone. SCA had 10,000 members at that time. You can't stand alone. And I said, I think we will. And I don't think he ever spoke to me after that. We're both from Wisconsin, so that was the direction. You asked, where have we come, how did we get here? Well, that was the direction. We're independent cusses, I'll tell you. Well, after the Atlanta meeting, Sally Webb, Sally Haug at the time, and I was second president?
Sally,
Yeah.
she was second.
Yeah. We had offices right next to each other at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and we sat down and we said, we promised to write a newsletter, and here it is June. Well, you know how it is when you're teaching. So we sat down and we wrote the first newsletter, and I remember writing the first word, finally, because it was 4 months late. We sent it to Manny. Sally and I were thinking of, some ditto little jobby, remember, before computers? Ditto jobby, and this came back. It's on really, thick paper, and it looks real. And it even has a logo, which is repeated throughout. I mean, a little picture, of our logo there. And I was swept away. He strikes again. He does good stuff.
Bob Miller and I and John Hanson, the designer, created that. John Hanson created it.
Now, I'm getting to where we are. In the doodling at that meeting, I have the original piece of paper that I doodled on, and I wrote a purpose for the organization. I came out with the purpose to study and promote effective listening. Study and promote, 2 things. And we hung on to that for several years. In our packet and elsewhere, you read the little card that you just got. We not only are studying and promoting, but we are to study, develop, teach, and practice. We got 4 things now. 4 things. From my 2, we've got 4. And I think this is good. We are an eclectic group. We should stay an eclectic group. And I think these 4 things reflect our eclecticism. So where have we come? I think we've branched out, and I think that that is a good idea. It's a broader vision. Are we meeting these goals? You bet your booties I think we are. Because we have more studies going on, we have development. How many people are writing stuff? Lots is being written. Are we teaching? Yes, indeed, in the business world as well as in the academic world. And are we practicing? Oh my, the health fields are represented here, the religious people, counseling and so on. Are we doing it? I think we are. Can we do more? I think so. Stay tuned.
Indeed. Well, it's interesting to revisit some of this. Just for the record, I was not invited to the 1979 meeting. But as a mere child, I stepped into this in 1980 and have been here ever since. What I think is so significant about the International Listening Association is that it's very reminiscent of some of us who are also members of the National Communication Association who know the early history of that organization, which created the Association of Teachers of Public Speaking or something back in 1915. And it represented a group of people who broke away from the National Council of Teachers of English because they felt like they were too subsumed into the English curriculum. And so we all appreciated the need for us to not get subsumed and lost in the speech-oriented Speech Communication Association at that time, which was very much a driving force for the way that we did stake ourselves as an independent group. And as you say, we've enjoyed this independence ever since. In enjoying that independence, what we most have accomplished is the interdisciplinary focus that we would never have been able to accomplish if we had stayed as part of the Speech Communication Association, or now the National Communication Association. In that, the study of listening draws from almost every possible field you can imagine. And almost every possible field that you can imagine has been represented at one time or another on our membership rolls. I think we were saying yesterday that collectively through the 25 years we've had something like 6,000 members, which is awesome to think about in terms of the number of people who have been here. Now, the question is they've been here and they've gone, which would suggest that there's also something to consider about where they've gone and so forth. But at this point, the accomplishment of the association is very much that interdisciplinary focus. We are not strictly a communication-oriented organization. I most came to appreciate that as the 3rd vice president, president-elect, in putting together the program for that early convention. I had been the Eastern Communication Association president, so I had experience in terms of putting all of that together. And I learned that in the communication discipline, we had a very different way of doing things than when you try to pull together psychologists, reading specialists, foreign language people, and so forth, all of whom have a very different orientation about the way organizations work. So, part of the early approach was kind of pulling that together to create our own culture in terms of our own timeline, our own deadlines, and so forth. In the 25 years we've been together, we've accomplished a great deal, as Alice and Manny have said. From the research perspective, we have a very respectable journal that provides us with a very important body of literature, understanding listening. We have a very active research committee that gives us the opportunity to continue to stay connected and to think ahead in terms of where we need to go. Obviously, as educators, it brings us together to look at curriculum and teaching issues, and also the practice, which is a very rich and a very important part of this organization, in that listening practice, like communication practice, is so very, very critical to our understanding of a theoretical and research model. And that's something that ILA gives that many of our professional organizations does not. Yeah.
I entered this organization as a wannabe. I had always had an interest in the subject of listening, and from 1964 to 1979 was on the faculty of Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York. For 5 of those years, I kind of stayed in the background, but for the next 10, I tried to get my colleagues in my department to institute a listening course. And as most of you must know, there's a kind of a hierarchical thing. If you can't, you get your department first, and you go on to your division, and then to get approval of a course. I was never, ever able to get a single person in the department to recognize listening as an entity, as something worth pursuing, looking at. They looked at me as if I had 7 heads. So in 1980, when the gods that be in 79 created their intent and their approach, somehow a flyer from that got to our bulletin board at Brooklyn College, and that's how I spotted this event and went, and met some of the most amazing people. And for me, as a wannabe, this organization did exactly what it said it was going to do and what Alice identified. It began the study of, or it continued the study of, and development of materials to allow me to teach and to practice. That's where my focus was and remained, and it was life-changing for me. I had to leave the university level for lack of credentials, went back to high school teaching, and was able to institute a listening course at a high school. Harvey Weiss and myself were, at that time, I believe, the only 2 high school level people teaching a full course of listening in the country. And that, I think, was referenced in one of your early books. Manny's materials, Carolyn and Andy's materials, gave me the substance from which to jump off and the ability to be creative in and of myself and start generating my own stuff. The organization gave me colleagues and networks with people like Warren Gore and all the rest of the people up here, and those of you who know were in those early years. It was the most exciting, growing period of my life, and gave me the impetus ultimately to leave academia and move off into the consulting world. Where did that go? Well, a business for 10, 11, 12 years that really did nicely in my standard of what I was after. Was able to turn over to my daughter this past year, which means it's still growing, still alive. So were we successful in achieving those goals from a very personal standpoint? Absolutely. And even today, it grows and grows and continues. Riva Poor, I mentioned, they won't let me forget Riva Poor, and when there's time, if you like, at some point, I'll share Riva Poor. But the essence of Riva Poor has not been looked at with a real close eye. Manny, I invite you to take a look, because this listening organization was begun on the back of a non-listening moment. And I'm embarrassed by that, although Manny consistently credits me with bringing the group together because of an incident that happened in 1980. But it all was based on our unwillingness to really give more time, attention, and understanding to poor Riva Poor. So don't compliment me. I mean, it has nothing to do with, I did nothing. Don't even bring her back.
The only comment we can make is there's no way this woman ever was remaining in the background.
That's true. That's where I started to show up. A wannabe who wanted to be noticed, and I continued. New York City, what else? You can make it there. Sorry.
You have a song and dance on
I
that?
do indeed.
Well, I'm just going to mention Riva Poor once, in light of the fact that she tried to take over the whole session there. And this dear soul stepped in and took it away. She got us steered back on track, and we were grateful for that, have been ever after. We never had anybody try to take over a session or an organization. And this was just one of the little blips in the road of progress. But we were most grateful, to repeat. My comments about the first 25 years. What is our impact on academia generally? I've written down relatively mixed but discernible. I think there are a number of people who have been in the teaching game, quote unquote, who for a long time did not think that speech was a proper course to be taught. But as someone in the classroom who always had enthusiasm, and it just came naturally. My father was a salesman for Paxton and Gallagher of Omaha, and I think from his genial personality and salesmanship, I developed an enthusiasm and a manner similar to. Then it became a factor in whatever text one used to teach speech. We had to add a chapter of our own on listening, because early, not many textbooks had anything or very little about listening. And of course today we've become believers, and we study, we research, we teach, and we practice, I think, better listening than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago, let alone 25 years ago. Final comments. I had a youngster in one of my basic public speaking classes during the 5th week come up and say, I didn't think or see how anyone could be so enthusiastic at 8 a.m. in the morning. He was confounded, but it was just my natural way, because I loved the speech class. I loved to be on either side. When I was getting my PhD at the University of Minnesota, the teachers that I had were marvelous. George, help me out, Manny.
Shapiro.
George Shapiro was a superb teacher, and I just vibrated in his classes. There were others, of course, but I'll move on. The final little comment I'm going to make is on the next page. Do any of you know how many, or who, first of all, who was the first university to offer a PhD in speech? Anybody?
Iowa.
Keep talking.
Wisconsin.
University of Wisconsin. 1875 was the first PhD in listening.
But you weren't there, were you?
Some have suspected, but every now and then they look at me with those eyes, and me go, their eyes glaze over. Anyway, that's all I have to do. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I feel like I do have to have that confession thing, that I am not a founding member, but in 1983, when I joined ILA, I was taking a course from Bill Arnold, and I was doing research on listening. That was part of my doctoral program. And the convention was in Scottsdale at that time, and Bill said, you can get extra credit if you go to this convention and volunteer and work at it, and you can attend the sessions. And so I did, and I called my mother that night, who has a background in speech, and many of you know her, but anyway, I called her and I said, Mom, I met Ralph Nichols and Manny Stile and Andy Walden and Carolyn Coakley. I met all these people whose research I was reading, and it was like meeting rock stars or something. It just was such a thrill to be able to put faces to the studies that I was reading. So that was my introduction into ILA. And just kind of in looking back, just some things that when I was president in '94, I felt like we needed a longer range vision of where we needed to go. So at the convention in '94, we formed a vision committee, and we met twice, and we did some brainstorming based on a scenario that Mary Wise put together that's from a negative perspective. Instead of everything is wonderful and beautiful, it was from a negative perspective, and that, by the year 2000, ILA had had ceased to exist because people didn't go to the conventions and they didn't submit papers, and so you use that as your basis, and then what you do is envision then what would have to happen in order for that vision not to become the truth. So I thought I pulled out the listening post that this was in, and I thought you might enjoy hearing some of what the Vision Committee came up with, and many of the people in this room were participated in that. But one of the goals that we came up with was to have 2,000 members by the year 2000. We've fallen a little short. Well, actually, we've had 2,000 members. We just didn't keep them all. But anyway, I think you'll find this kind of fun to hear what things we came up with, and some of which we have achieved, and some of which we haven't achieved that, but we've gone in that direction. So just a couple of things. The vision that the committee has developed includes not only 2,000 members, but we will have had a European conference. We will have doubled our international memberships and our corporate memberships. We will have a journal published quarterly and an applied magazine published monthly. We will have an executive office and headquarters with a full-time paid executive director. We will have an institute for research and the Nichols Listening Institute for conducting training programs sanctioned by ILA for businesses. We will have a task force to implement listening training in K-12, teacher education programs, and parent education programs, and we will have an education speakers bureau. We will have multi-campus research projects and research partnerships between listening researchers and our corporate members. We will have a variety of university deans as members, including law, medical, seminary, nursing, social work, and business school deans. And we will have members of Congress, high-profile journalists, cabinet members, and Fortune 100 company presidents, superintendents from large school districts, and PTA state presidents as ILA members. We will have a Listen to Heal program being used in the healthcare field from acute care to hospice, and we will have invited all writers on listening to join ILA. Well, some of those we have achieved, and some of them we've simply made progress in that direction. From that vision statement, Margaret Fitchhauser, one of the goals, by the way, was to have a definition of listening, which we achieved the next year and adopted that. And then Margaret Fitchhauser took the vision and turned it into a 5-year plan. And several of the things that are in the 5-year plan we have actually achieved. So that's kind of fun to see some of the things that we can actually check off the list. Many of them we can't check off the list as having done, but we certainly have made progress in that direction. And so I think that in terms of what have we done, I think we did establish some directions to take, such as broadening whom we solicited as members so that we do have a much broader membership. We do have more research being done in a variety of areas, and we do have more application of it in business settings and in practical settings so that there's a place for us to use what we're learning in the research. And I think those are all really significant things that we've achieved. So that would be...
And that's terrific, and I thank you for all of that. And now we'd like to hear in reverse order, where should we go in the next 25 years?
Okay. I'd actually like to see us do that visioning exercise again so that we have a long-term vision of where we would like to go, so that when we make progress, the path that we're going down is the one that we see, that's the direction that we want to go. That would be the first thing. The second thing is I think we need to revisit the definition. Do we need to change it? I think that there are some things missing from it. I think it needs that interactive component to it. I think it needs some sort of a cultural mention, that somehow the culture mitigates how we listen and that sort of thing. The third thing I think we need to do is that I think we need to have something to offer. If we're going to have campaigns to increase membership or marketing approaches and so on, I think we need to have some things to offer those individuals that we are asking to come to the conventions or to join the organization. And when I say that, I simply mean something that would be of interest to them. So I'd like to see us do some things like offer some of those regional conferences again, have some special conference sessions. So if we were to invite some groups that we haven't, I think, really tapped into seriously, like counselors, psychology, psychiatry, the media, music. There are a variety of them. But so perhaps what we could do is offer some special conferences, say on how do you, as a counselor, how do you do a better job of listening? Or if you're in the media, how do you get people to listen, or what impacts whether they listen and how they listen and so on. So if we had some conferences, not only would that give us something to offer them, a product to offer them, but as well it gives us another opportunity that we can meet. I think, if you don't get to the convention, you sort of lose the connection, and sometimes I think we lose our members because they didn't get to that one event that we have. And we are such a family organization that I think that's important for us to have that face-to-face time. And then the only other thing that I'd like to see us do is to simply keep casting the net ever broader so that we're looking for some of those other groups. I mean, for us, the sky is truly the limit. There is not one profession, there's not one person, there's not one age group that listening doesn't impact their lives. So, the entire population of the earth could belong to the International Listening Association.
But where would we have our meetings?
Robert, you're so frank.
I would suggest that among the things that we may do in the next 1, 2, 4, 5 years would be to go to the business arena generally, not with our hands stretched out to get money or anything of that sort, but try to get them interested in the practice of their communication abilities and to try to make them understand that sales are great and salesmanship is important and it's a skill. But the idea of an ethical base that we have understood, if we've studied the history of rhetoric, we know that began pre-Christian, and that an ethical base, one from Aristotle and one from Plato, and on and on and on since. You can name the ones who studied the history of rhetoric, can list off the various important ones over the centuries. I think they need to be reminded, though. The Enron thing, of course, one can point at and talk about with voices that are disapproving of the pattern there, what happened to them. But it's not so much to blame someone, it is to help understand the people going into business, to understand that they can have high standards of behavior. They can practice the skills of real salesmanship based upon ethical standards and understanding their product, their service, their functions, and so on. So I guess I would push that, trying to give them a push out of our background.
I think listening as a critical skill is what we have to keep in the forefront. It's a life skill. If what Sheila said, that everyone on the globe could become a member of this organization, we have to do something to make everyone on the globe see it as a critical life skill. And the approach that we've had has been, I think, more grassroots than it has been going to those institutional level places and doing something at that level. Now, I know it's been tried, and I think instead of also just saying that this is what we need to do, we should be talking about how to do it. But the institutional level, I think, is key. The government of this country, at the very least, has got to subscribe, as we do, to the importance of listening. And I don't want to get political, and I don't want to get into anything, but listening has to be a prime educational goal, and that's where I think we should be putting a lot of our energies and efforts. And all the state governments, and some states became receptive, and wonderful programs got put in place. And then somehow either they disappeared or they're still there and we're not hearing enough about them. Teacher training institutions, which suffered enormously with the cutbacks. We want teachers to teach listening. Well, why? Because we say, poof, you know how, and you can. Is this a game we're saying everybody can do it, so just go out and do it? Like, poof, you're a team. You don't have to know how to be a team. I mean, we're big at doing that. But I think that's where we have to get it in the subliminal level of the culture. I am so tired of having people ask me what I do and telling them and the organization, and what's that? I never heard of you. It's very depressing. And there's no reason for that. And they're missing out They're missing out. We need passionate people. That's what these people were, as far as I'm concerned. They were the passion. This morning we heard Stephanie present, Stephanie Matteries. I mean, she's got the passion. I'm sure there'll be others with the passion, but that's what we need, to find that passion and put it back in place. If not for Nadine Mosnick and Florence Wolf's book and the publications of that sort, I mean, that's where it began for me, and that's, you know, this becomes a ripple effect, but not enough at that level. It's got to start at that upper level. So by and large, and then in the business world, there's a tremendous amount of resistance still, although in the last 5 years of my private practice, much more receptivity as a result, I think, of things done here and certainly things done by Manny Style. So I think we're just not doing it for the business world. And since a Stephen Covey can exist and become global, then there is no reason why we can't get into that visibility level. There's no reason. So we need to think in those terms, I believe, but then we have to find the methodology to get there and to do it. There were people in those early years who would have taken on those challenges, I think, if we could have refined them and focused them and got them going. And I think Melissa's model of getting groups to go and present at NCA, we've infiltrated the academic community, especially the speech field. They do give us some respect now, maybe not as much as we'd like, but more than ever existed. So the Speaker Bureau concept as an entity, a group, a program that travels. Let it go to the Lions Club, to the Rotary Club. Let it offer itself to various businesses. Let it get to ASTD. Let it get to the Human Resource group. Go on the road. We need to be seen, heard, and known.
Do you mind if we flip?
We're a team.
You're
As a tag
asking
team.
permission?
We even, yes, I
Then you
mean,
can
we
do
even
whatever you want.
shows our colors too.
Some here at this convention and recent conventions are calling for more cognitive research. And I agree. And Laura, the other day, you said we need access to instrumentation of cognitive psychologists. Now, how you even got that out was it's amazing. I would like us, this may sound strange, because we're not MDs, I would like us to study the brain. And I'll tell you why. When I was teaching listening, I discovered from others' writings that there's a place near the hippocampus in our brain called Wernicke, if you're German. Wernicke's area where, and this is how it's defined, we make sense out of speech. What does that mean? I think this is an exciting horizon. Let's look at the brain, and it might give us more legitimacy as an organization and more stature. The end.
And Alice makes such a good point in that I sometimes reflect that as researchers, we're in the social scientific model and we're up against those people in the communication field in particular who are very much fixed on message production. And so trying to get message reception in the door has been, I think, a challenge for us for over 25 years. And I think about maybe we need to just bypass this and get into listening biology. And I'm especially intrigued with this because my daughter is in a radiology residency to become a neuroradiologist. And as soon as she's through with this, we're obviously going to write a major grant to get the MRI equipment to be able to do the research that we're talking about, to better understand, through understanding brain function, what listening cognition, listening behavior really is all about. So I think we have all kinds of exciting directions that we can go. Casting my passion not in past tense, but keeping it in present tense, Carol, I reflect on where we need to go, not just in terms of a research agenda. I also think that one of the accomplishments that Warren speaks to is that we are there in terms of direct instruction in listening. And from an educational model, that is really important. And we've played a major role in this in the sense that early on, speech was all about preparing the speaker with the assumption that those skills would transfer into being a good listener. So that, for example, if you could organize an effective speech, The assumption that speech teachers through many generations was that then you can organize it in your head as you listen to it. So that while reading behavior people were into the direct instruction model light years ahead of us, it's taken us a while in the communication field to come to appreciate that. Now you look at those basic communication course books and we're there. There is indeed a chapter on listening and we should be excited for that. In terms of ILA implications, we still think about the membership base and how do we grow, and that's something that Manny and I through the years have always grappled with, because the original vision we had was a much larger organization bringing in, as Sheila talks, the other groups. And I would suggest that at some point we really ought to sit down and think about those other groups, in that one of the research perspectives we should be taking is benchmarking effective listening practices. And that would go the whole gamut from business and ministry and so forth into other fields, for example, polygraphy. I did a seminar this summer at the Center for Polygraphy. And it was intimidating to stand before these people who hold the key to your life in terms of security clearances, but they listen for a living, you know, and there are other examples of that that would be really interesting to explore. ILA also ought to think about the leadership role in terms of moving forward in the next 25 years, building on where we've been. Melissa tasked me with running a task force last year on the whole issue of reinventing the wheel and how each executive board comes together and not using the institutional memory. We don't have a lot of institutional memory. To build on that, rather than going back and sort of retreading some of the same issues and doing some of the same things that we've tried before, that we need a better understanding of that from the institutional memory perspective. I also think we need to do better with public relations. Forever, I've talked about how this organization needs to put together some PSAs for television, for radio, about you should listen, you should learn to listen, you know, those kinds of things that we can put out there to awaken better the American consciousness of what listening is all about. And not to let that just sort of happen by serendipity with some organizations that do attempt to do this. And then as you speak to the impact on the world stage, I worry that sometimes we really don't have the impact that we need to. I think that in Washington, we encounter administrations that don't really appreciate and understand the role of listening in the intercultural international arena, and how much that is creating sort of the American perspective syndrome that we're all there to talk at you rather than to listen to you. So going back to this list that you all have from 1979, in terms of the list of things that we need to do, I'm impressed that a lot of that ought to be put together in terms of developing a center for the study of listening, in which we've got a repository, in which we've got a center for collating and collecting and connecting people in research studies, providing a syllabus, instructional base. I mean, there's so many things we could do. On our campus in Maryland, we have the Center for Reading Research that was funded by the U.S. Department of Education. We need to put together a grant proposal to create a similar center for listening study. Yeah.
Well said. One of the best things that my mother and father ever taught me was that we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And so we can track back from today back as far as any of us can track, and we can track forward for the next 25 years in the same way. But my mother and father also said, finish what you start. And in a sense, all we really have done is to start. We have accomplished a number of things, as everybody has already talked about. I would identify 6 things, some that supplement some of the points that have already been made, that need to be done in the immediate future. Not the long-term future, but the immediate future. Number 1, I think that some bright young person out there ought to engage in the gathering of and the writing of the history of ILA to date. One of the things that I'm struck with is that there's a lot of information and it's scattered. I drug 2 boxes off the shelves recently that I have kept and maintained. I know that Alice has. I know that everybody has boxes that they haven't passed on. As we've gone through 5 or 6 executive directors, when I served as executive director in 1984, when I shipped stuff down to Dick Coyanthe, I didn't ship it all down because I knew that it would disappear. And so your idea of a center, of a repository, of a history that clearly gathers where we've been, what have we done, what have we challenged, what have we not done, where are we going, so that in the next 25 years, we not only build on the last 25 years, but we continue to record very precisely and very clearly where we're at. Number 2, I think that we need to very carefully sit back and study why are we where we are today in terms of our membership, our turnover. To correct Andy, we've had 2,000 roughly members, not 6.
Yeah.
But the numbers aren't important. The more important question is, why do we not have? Now, some people die and some people go in other directions and other people change interests, and all that's understandable. But what I know is that there are still people out there who are dealing with listening who were members, but they're not members anymore. And I think that we need to focus on why have we lost those that we've lost, what could we have done, but more important, what should we do in the future so that we don't lose the people that we have or the people that we gain. Third, I think that the whole issue of growth is obvious, but I think we need to add the concept of growth with diversity, as has been already commented on. You know, in 1,000 ways, we've accomplished a great deal with the input of a lot of different people. But our early goal, our early vision was that we would have broad diversity of membership. And without pointing any fingers or blaming anybody, the simple reality is that we have collapsed primarily into an organization focused on education and educators. Nothing wrong with that component, but we have not grown, we've not built, we've not maintained, we've not expanded into the other diverse areas, again, as others have so well said. Fourth, obviously, you cannot do anything if you cannot afford to do it. And when we talk about growth, obviously, it's interesting if you look at numbers. I remember sitting in the second year of this organization in Monaco. I had been speaking in France, and we were on our way to Italy, and we spent a night in Monaco on a dark, rainy night. And it was time to write the president's perspective, the president's letter for that newsletter. And I played around with some numbers, and I thought, we started with 27. We went to the first convention with 54 plus. We went to Denver with 108 in attendance. And I just played the progression numbers out, and I figured out that by a certain time, by the way, we would have everybody in the world if we simply double. Well, we're not going to double every year. But the challenge of growth, and by the way, there's only one way this organization will ever grow. Sheila spoke to it well, but in terms of having things to offer and so forth, having reasons for people to come, having reasons for people to stay, having reasons for people to contribute. But most important, there's nobody out there who's going to help us grow this organization. And it's interesting that, again, I don't want to bend too back far on history, but in 1984, I wrote an article in the newsletter entitled ILA Challenges. Talked about the embryonic era, play that with words, and the future challenges. And the fact is that if this organization is going to grow, it's going to take the significant effort, not just a marginal effort, but a significant effort of everyone who's already here, and then everybody who comes in to continue to grow it. But I want to underline the importance of diversity. Number 5, very quickly. Number 4, relative to funds, grants, money. It takes money to build and to run a good professional association. And one of the biggest mistakes that Bob Miller and I made, and you were involved, but Bob and I set the early membership fee of $35 to be a member. By the way, we did that out of respect to people who, we wanted numbers. But the fact is, we did not build the financial means. If Bob Miller's Telstar wouldn't have financed early, if my company, CDI, wouldn't have financed early, we wouldn't have gotten Sperry to finance early. Those early years, we would never have gotten to the next years. But we're way beyond that. Somewhere, grants, with a group of educators, we ought to be able to find all kinds of grant money from people who know how to get that kind of money. But we also then need to get it from businesses and from organizations and from hospitals and from those people out there where, as Willie Sutton said when he wrote his book about robbing banks, they asked him, "Why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." And so that's what we need to do. We need to figure out where the money is, and we need to get more. Number 5, and I'm just about done. I think that the main thing we need to do is to expand everything that we've already done well and do it better. But most of all, what we really need to do, and it was another great lesson that my mother and father taught me when I was very young, is, and it's nothing new, but it is difficult to herd cats. And this organization, in many ways, is an organization of cats. And so somewhere we need to create a cohesiveness of individuals who are all individually bent and creative and competent, etc. How do we build a cohesiveness that basically, by the way, the research people have done it very well. But we do not have a ILA effort of research. We have a lot of individuals, but at least they're cohesive. How do we do it with instructional, the practitioners? How do we do it with all of the facets that we face? Those would be 6 simple strategies. But the fact of the matter is, all we have to do is to remember that whatever we've done has been great, but we've just really just started, and we have great history. How do we draw back on it? How do we move forward with all of the brightness of all of you young people?
Thank you. Before we thank the panel, there are some other people in this room that we need to thank as well. If you came into this organization prior to member 663, okay, by 1983, please raise your hand. Look at all of these terrific people. Please join me in welcoming, or not welcoming, well, it is welcoming and thanking this panel for their expertise today. And instead of doing the evaluations for them, I think that they would appreciate much more face-to-face interaction. So if you could thank them face-to-face today, I'm certain that they would appreciate that. We probably have time for about 1 or 2 questions. Lisa.
I have a question. I thought the idea of grant writing is very good. I am in the educational arena, but I have no idea where to look for grants and how to write it. Is there some process or committee or something within ILA, sorry, I don't flip up it. Somebody's snoring. Anyways, that could serve as a grant writing unit for us? I mean, as far as could we, if there isn't any, could we form a committee or a task force?
Lisa, the research committee yesterday agreed that our pre-conference at our next convention ought to be devoted to grant writing. And our idea is to bring in a grants writer to walk us through the process, allow us time to brainstorm ideas for fundable projects, and also look at possible funding sources. So, yeah, we're going to deal with this.
I had to show the PR committee meetings, but I nobody showed up. Anyway, so maybe we need to get together with PR and the research committee, and so that we can maybe get the word out before the pre-conference next year. So I will address that with Cindy, who's the actual chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had Nadine up here.
I just wanted to make a historic comment. Well, of all our history. Write it down. When Carol mentioned Stephen McCovey, he has a chapter called "Seek to understand, not to be understood." And I want to remind you that at the 1980 first convention, the speech that Dr. Ralph Nichols made, that was the subject of his speech. And every time I see that chapter, I think how lovely it would have been if Nick had gotten a citation.
The struggle to be human.
What?
Struggle to be human.
That's right. That's right.
I just want to make a comment on Sheila's suggestion of having regional conferences and working with other groups that have conferences. One of the difficulties that I found in some of the other areas that I work in is people are conference outfit.
Yeah.
It's hard to get people to go to so many conferences. So what we're starting to do is collaborate and tack on our work with somebody else's conference. So when the organization designs learning conferences, we offer a day or a half day there so that people don't have to make an extra conference to participate in those things.
Good point.
You know, Laura, I just wanted to ask Andy an update on Nick.
He and
We haven't heard.
Colonel are still living in an apartment by themselves, which is amazing. He's 98, she's 94. The last few months, Nick has had a downward slide. When we have conversations, we have wonderful conversations about old times. He doesn't remember what he had for breakfast, but they're in remarkable, as I said, they're in remarkable health, physical health for their age. Although the last time, a couple times ago when I chatted with him, he said, these are the golden years, but he said golden is overrated. Gold is overrated. But they do extend their greetings.
What should we do to extend our greetings to them?
Drop them a note because they live in an apartment by themselves, and stagger the postcards, the letters. They're in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is a couple hundred miles up.
Yes.
Address would be in the directory.
I think it would be fun though if we all, signed our names or something maybe on a big sheet.
We should get a big card over here at Walgreens and everybody sign it tonight at the banquet.
Yeah.
We'll get that for the banquet tonight. We can make sure we get one.
Yeah.
Where's Jim? Okay. I have just one real quick historical thing. I was there back in the summer of '79, along with, there's about 5 or 6 of us here.
You arranged the weather in Denver, didn't you?
Oh, that's
Yes, sir. Always call me sir. Yeah, whatever. That works too. I had a new historical moment this morning.
A new historical.
When I met for the first time Susan McBride, who was one of the trainers for Sperry Corporation in the 70s, who is a first-time member here at the organization. So, Susan, would you stand up and let everyone... The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I found someone who knew and understood that at Sperry, we understand how important it is to listen. She taught us. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Let's thank the panel once again.
I hate to hold you from lunch because that's the most important part, but I would really like, if you look back here, I didn't hear any focus on the most important time in a child's history, and that is preschool. Preschool, by the time they're 5, they've got all their attitudes about listening. They've learned that the wrong way or the right way or the best way, and I'd like to add my recommendation as a focus to deal with preschool, because after 5, 6, 7 years, it's already set up. So I would like to get that into the record officially as maybe a focus that we can look at.
Dr. Benjamin's sweet spot.